This is Think or Be Eaten, and this is part 5 of We Are What We Hated. And Larry had come up with the title, and his is probably more accurate, and that is We Are Becoming, but because of what looks like will eventuate, we're going to reach that very nasty nadir. And that is to behave much as the Nazis did prior to and through, and actually, in a lot of cases, after World War II. So this branch of the show, Larry, is going to deal with eugenics, correct?
Correct.
And that's something also, I guess you could say, that the Nazis were not alone in this, because Britain and the United States were really very interested in such a practice.
That's correct. In fact, one person that I read said that basically eugenics was an idea that was formulated by the British aristocracy and was funded in large part by the American elites long before the Germans really put it into practice on a large scale.
Yeah, I wanted to say something to you last week, and I did, and I'm just going to throw that in there now.
Okay.
And that is, I had Professor Daniel Paul on. Mm-hmm. He is a Micmac, I believe full-blooded, lives in the Maritimes, and wrote a book, We Were Not the Savages. Mm-hmm. And when he came on, very much a gentleman, but the discussion inevitably turned back to what the Brits did to the native peoples in that area. Mm-hmm. And of course, part of that has been forever, I guess, commemorated in that whole story of the expulsion of the Acadians. Mm-hmm. But when we were talking, and I just flat out asked him, I said, all right, what do you think's the deal with the Brits? And he paused and he said something to the effect of, they're very different. So
well, that's a polite way of saying it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah, I kind of agree with that. It's but really, when you get down to it, the Spaniards did some terrible things to the Native Americans of Mexico and Central America. You know, all the other European imperialist nations did the same. Uh-huh. But in his particular case, in the way his people were treated, was definitely by the British.
And I'm sure that there would be historians that would note that even the native peoples, I don't know in all tribes or nations, but if a woman became a widow and she had no, what would you call it? What do they call Boaz? Remember, Boaz was like an advocate for a widow, and that kind of saved her. Well, that's what happened. I mean, it's some of these cultures, I guess, if the woman had no advocate, they kind of left her back at the old site, and that was the end of it.
Well, you're talking about the Native Americans. There were certain tribes of them that did some terrible things to each other as well. I mean, there was genocide, amongst some of those tribes against others. You had some tribes that were relatively highly civilized, such as the Cherokees and the Plains Indians, like the Sioux. But you also had the Comanches and Apaches, who were very much, couldn't say necessarily racist, but they did not have a great deal of regard or love of other tribes, and they treated other people really badly.
By the way, Larry McMurtry, through that Lonesome Dove series, makes much about the nastiness of the Comanche.
Yeah.
And is that?
Well, it's human to be when someone is different, racially, religiously, or whatever. It's human to a certain amount of fear about that difference, and then fear leads to hatred. Hatred leads to violence, and these are really some very low characteristics of mankind. But it just it's all over the board.
In a way, we are agreed that it comes with the flesh, no matter what the ethnicity or racial makeup should be.
Right.
But now we're taking a turn and looking at, I guess we expected that as society got more technologically advanced, hopefully with every passing decade and century, maybe more educated, and that might all be true. Mm. But what didn't happen was they really didn't get any more compassionate.
No.
or willing to brook differences, as you just said. And that's kind of a disappointment, considering we think we're so evolved. But as Jonathan Gray once said on the show, I asked him, I said, do you think we're de-evolving? And he goes, oh, without a doubt. So we have technology, great, big deal. The thing is, we're still de-evolving. So
right.
There you go.
And also, you have nations which are nominally Christian, and it's not Christian to persecute and murder your brother. It's just not.
Right.
These were not concepts taught by Christ. These are not humane concepts, and yet, Great Britain, the United States, and Germany are all nominally Christian nations, and yet some of the most terrible eugenic, genocidal programs have been put forth by people from these nations.
Yeah, Anja quoted me a stat the other day, and she said, "Did you know that 70 million Americans say that they're evangelical Christians?" And I'm like, well, first of all, that's bourgeois. Mm-hmm. But I had to laugh because it's like, in the old days, everybody was a Protestant or a Catholic or a Jew. I mean, whenever remember growing up?
Right.
Everybody, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a Protestant, blah, blah, blah. And most of the Protestants and Catholics, and even a lot of the Jewish kids that we grew up with and stuff, were really nominally involved in their religion. Mm-hmm. They all, we took off after confirmation. They took off after the bar mitzvah. So that wasn't a big deal. But to say that 70 million in this country are evangelical to me, is a major laugh.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about is, and I don't want to digress anymore, but, just as you had said before, even though you present to people a good guy and a bad guy, and in this case, we're always the good guys as they break the story down for us. As we speak, we're still the good guys. Some of the Libyans don't believe that, but that's okay. But the thing is, that doesn't make it righteous. It doesn't justify the shedding of blood for any advancement of an agenda, whether it's proselytizing. It just doesn't anymore. It doesn't, we talked about it, but how many Christians aren't behind the Christian version of a jihad against Islam? Wow.
Yeah.
So,
and people always, when they talk about, the people that they're going after, they're always thinking about the young male, aggressive person within that group. But what you've also got to consider is there's an awful lot of little children, women, and especially in Muslim society, women have no say in anything in the more radical Muslim societies.
But but
and elderly people who are defenseless, people who are not a problem for you, are not a threat to you. And these are the people that, in the main part, will be getting hurt. Those are the people who will be getting killed and have their lives destroyed.
I was just going to say, women have no say. It's true, but yet they share an equal opportunity victims.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. So now we turn toward the German twist on eugenics.
Well, I thought I would try to define eugenics. And the person who came up with the term eugenics was Sir Francis Galton, who was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and was one of the first people to try to use eugenics as a social political philosophy. And I'll just read from his writing. We greatly want a brief word to express the science of improving stock, which by no means is confined to questions of judicious mating, but which, especially in the case of man, takes cognizance of all influences that tend, in however remote a degree, to give to the more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing speedily over the less suitable than they would otherwise have had. The word eugenics would sufficiently express the idea. It is at least a neater word and a more generalized one than viviculture, which I once ventured to use. And then he says, eugenics is a study of the agencies under social control that may improve or impair the racial qualities of future generations, either physically or mentally. Well, Galton really was the first person to sort of put the life of mankind on the level of breeding animals and wanting to, quote, improve the stock. And I'm not sure where he thought he got the authority to run around, improving the stock, but he did. And, of course, he was a British philosopher of sorts. There are three main people that were the early philosophical basis for the idea of eugenics. They were Thomas Malthus, Charles Darwin, and the aforementioned Francis Galton. And I could talk about those three guys, and then after that, maybe a little more of an overview of eugenics as related to the Nazis.
Sure.
Go into Malthus. Thomas Robert Malthus, this is from Bernhard Schreiber, who wrote an essay called The Men Behind Hitler. I like to use Schreiber because he does a good job of summarizing the people and events and ideas involved. And also, he has quite a stake in the whole idea because his father was a Luftwaffe pilot in World War II. He desperately hates the Nazis and saw what it did to his country, so he has been involved in doing a certain, he's an academic in Germany and writes against Nazism. Anyway, Thomas Robert Malthus was an English political economist and historian who in 1798 published a book called An Essay on the Principle of Population. This document started a reaction against the earlier writings of Godwin, Cortese, and others who reinforced the principles of emancipation and enlightenment, which ensued after the French Revolution. Malthus' theories put forward here and in later works have a surprising influence even today. He proposed that poverty and therefore also vice and misery are unavoidable because population growth will always exceed food production. The checks on population growth were wars, famine, and diseases. Malthus proposed sexual abstinence for the working class as a means by which the population excess could be diminished and a balance achieved. In this way, the lower social classes were made totally responsible for social misery. This solution was based on the hypothesis that population increased in geometric progression, as in 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, while food production increased in arithmetic progression, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. The situation already existing in his time would get worse, according to his claims, and would reach alarming proportions. Malthus' presentations had the impact of a bomb. His mathematical and geometrical explanations and diagrams had a hypnotic effect, and only a few asked on what his claims were actually based. His theory has retained its persuasive power to such an extent that many of our present authorities use it as a basis of operation. Yet neither Malthus nor his later disciples ever managed to put forward any scientific proof for his theory, and in fact, excellent scientists have at various times disproven Malthus' theory and the ideology resulting from it. However, with the book, Malthus created an atmosphere which not only prevented a real solution to the social problems, but also promoted the repressive legislation which worsened the conditions of the poor in England. It was reasoned that better conditions for the poor would only encourage them to further propagate, putting those who were capable of work at a disadvantage. Malthusianism, then, moved forward to achieve its greatest triumph in 1834 with a new law providing for the institution of workhouses for the poor, in which the sexes were strictly separated to curb the otherwise inevitable overbreeding. This type of thinking has an inherent devaluation of human life through fear that the ever-increasing population of lower classes will devour the more civilized or better people. Then we can go on to Charles Darwin. I think most people are familiar with Darwin, but might just give a little overview of how he fits into the picture on eugenics. Charles Robert Darwin, English naturalist, after years of research work, formulated in 1859 his theory of evolution in his book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Race in the Struggle for Life. Without, at that time, going into a study of mankind, he tried to explain the development of life forms in terms of a struggle for existence. The result of this struggle will be a natural selection of those species and races who were to triumph over those weaker ones who would perish. During his research, he came across Malthus' essay and suddenly saw that his own theory could be expanded to include all life in a struggle for existence that would be inevitable if food production was to lag behind the growth rate of the population. And so Darwin took over the false doctrine of Malthus and made it a cornerstone of his own theory. In 1871, he published his next large work entitled The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. which was based on his earlier book, but which dealt almost exclusively with man. In it, he came to the reasonable conclusion that both in physical structure and physiological behavior, there was no difference between man and other mammals. However, the idea that this was also applicable to mental and moral qualities shows that he was on unsound ground. Although Darwin was an excellent naturalist, he was not a very good philosopher. In his attempt to explain the social development of man as a struggle for existence and selection through natural means, he compounded the error that Malthus had made by yet another attempt to apply a biological solution to philosophical and social problems. Darwin's speculations to be found in his notebook that thought was a brain secretion is completely without basis. Modern theories of evolution finally succeeded in clarifying this confusion by separating the development of man into different steps. Despite this, Darwin's theses and others of his followers have been very influential over a long period of time. And then we go on to the guy who was mentioned earlier, Francis Galton, who was Darwin's cousin or half-cousin, depending on who you read. Francis Galton was an English psychologist and a half-cousin of Darwin. Very erratic in his thought processes, he was unable to complete research in even one area. Hardly would he begin a research project before throwing out a theory and then move on to a new field, leaving the proof of the theory to others. He was so fascinated with Darwin's theory that he spent an unusually lengthy period of time trying to prove that mental abilities were hereditary. In 1869, he published his book, Hereditary Genius, and in 1883, Inquiries into Human Faculty. In his inquiries, he undertook to transfer his hereditary theories from the individual to the whole race. Galton extended Darwin's theory of natural selection into a concept of deliberate social intervention, which he held to be the most logical application of evolution to the human race. Galton was by no means satisfied to let evolution take its course freely. Having decided to improve the human race through selective breeding, brought about through social intervention, he developed a subject which he called eugenics, the principle of which was that by encouraging better human stock to breed and discouraging the reproduction of less desirable stock, the whole race could be improved. Well, that's kind of an overview of I guess we could call them the fathers of eugenics, the three main influences, and as you can see, these were 18th and 19th century British philosophers and scientists.
Let me throw in here, because I do it every so often,
Sure.
and you never know who's not heard this before, but if you go to galton.org,
Mm-hmm.
there are a number of links, and if you click on eugenics, one of the selections you'll be given is to a seminar that was held around 1909. Forgive me if I'll just take a second to be correct about this. Yeah, you can click on eugenics. It's definition, scope, and aims. American Journal of Sociology, Volume 10, July 1904, number 1. But what gets me in this is you can see when H.G. Wells gets up to be a presenter that he, for lack of better idiom, says, well, it gets in the face of Galton. I would even say that he thought Galton a wussy. And when Wells concludes his remark about what should we do with regard to eugenics, which he also refers to in an Americanism as stirpiculture, here's the way that Wells ends his presentation. The way of nature has always been to slay the hindmost, and there is still no other way unless we can prevent those who would become the hindmost being born. It is in the sterilization of failures and not in the selection of successes for breeding that the possibility of an improvement of the human stock lies. And I don't think it's a stretch for me to say, in other words, if they look and in fact are deformed at birth, gas them.
Yeah, I mean, this is like what a loving statement that is. I mean, this is like a return to the days of ancient Rome when if somebody was born deformed or blind, they were just left outside the walls of the city to be eaten or, by wild animals. It just here's a guy who's supposedly a great a civilized, cultured man, a writer,
a futurist, yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, and here he is just expressing the most gross, base appeal to mass murder and barbarism. It's beyond shocking. It's just flat out disgusting. You know, where does he come off as being someone who set him up to play God? You know,
he did.
Yeah, that's it.
Also,
that's it, right.
There's another one involved in this. Everybody thinks of him as such a glib playwright, and he was, and that's George Bernard Shaw. Mm-hmm. But in the end, I think it might even be in a epilogue to his book, A Woman's Intelligent Guide to Socialism.
Yeah.
Those terms will get you there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could not believe what he said there. And one of his choices were that, you know, socialism is good, but if you had not the industry, something to that effect, okay, to be fed and clothed, then you should be, I don't know if he used the word killed. I think it was killed in a kindly manner.
Yeah, it's these eugenicists are always being kindly to the people that they kill. It's for your own good.
Well, that's it. I was going to say that's what Cool Hand Luke said. Stop being so good to me. I know.
You know, and the British aristocracy, they really, I mean, I can't think of a more effeminate, effete group of people. You know, these are, for the most part, guys who wouldn't last 5 minutes in a fist fight on a school ground, and they're talking about, how we have to slay the hindmost, and we're so fit, and they're not. I don't know.
Something else is happening, I think, right now, too, in this culture. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how they're going to wheedle their way there, but I am assuming it's going to have to do with the way insurance will be offered in years to come. I think it's not so hard to envision that there will come a day when your purchases, you're not going to have a credit card. You won't need a store card. You know the store cards? I don't know what you have down there if you go to
Yeah, we have those.
Yeah, and it's nice. You're supposed to get any breaks on any items that are identified as sales. That card will make sure you get it, but it also logs what you buy. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a card that now is going to be the new way to transact, you could say it might be the mark of the beast. It could be a forerunner to it. Everything you buy will be logged. And if the diet which is built on what you buy is poor and leads you to be a risk, you either don't get insurance or there'll be some other draconian penalty or whatever.
Right. And if you buy beer or you buy cigarettes, that already profiles you as somebody who may have a health risk, due to alcohol and tobacco consumption.
Yeah, and people can make an argument that that's the way it should be. All right, fine. A lot of Christians talk about they don't drink because they don't want to defile the temple, the body, which is a temple. It's like, yeah, but you go to McDonald's like 5 times a week. It's the old story.
Yeah, that'll mess your temple up right there.
This is a joke, but this actually happened. And this is back in the 70s, and we had a frat party one night, and this dilapidated house looked like the Addams family owned it. There was more action on the porch than there was in the second floor. But somebody went out, got the munchies, went out and got a sack full of McDonald's, which is just like a minute's drive away. And somebody, of course, at the end of the night just couldn't get that last burger down, had unwrapped it and left it on the porch.
Oh, my God.
I came by 2 days later and I looked at it, it was fine. I'm serious, and I'm like, oh, my God, that's going in us?
It does not decompose.
No.
Due to the chemical content.
Well, and I asked the
it's
brother.
Bombed.
Exactly. And I had asked the brother of a girlfriend of mine once who went off to medical school. And, of course, we were all, just like you, we were all children that around, maybe 11, 12, 13, somewhere around there, saw the transition from going to the bakery for bread, the fish store for fish, the butcher for meat, and went to the supermarket where they offered bread like Arnold's and all that other stuff that would last like 3 months. And I one time just talking it out with the brother, I said, is there something that's not good about something that's added into what we eat that won't let life grow on it? And he looked at me and the first question is, manufacturing and the food industry would never do that to us. Ha, ha, ha. But he stopped and he looked at me and he goes, you know what? you're probably right. And that's, and that was a real comeuppance to think of, all this convenience that was begotten through artificial preservatives being put in everything we eat and drink. And that's a stretch from where we were going. But again, we're looking at something that is going to give an excuse someday to the kindly elimination of the hindmost. And the other place I was going, Larry, and that's this: as much as there is a discrepancy, a disparity between what we're now seeing as really rich people and everybody else, it has struck me, and I was listening to Colin Cowherd on ESPN radio, but he comes up with something sometimes that it's very interesting. And while there is a number of every generation now who are really very technologically savvy, even prescient, and are shakers and movers in that world, which is really going to jet for them, there's also another whole and larger majority that aren't very good, they aren't thinkers. I mean, they're not brought up that way. They're not educated that way. They're not thinkers. They're not really too deep. They don't critically analyze, and they're pleasure packages. And that's what I see coming. I mean, now we're going to get rid of the middle level between, what did we have once? We had the Morlocks and the Eloi. If I got that. Yeah, the Morlocks and the Eloi. And there was no middle ground. And that's another thing that came out of one of Wells's works, The Time Machine. And the Eloi just are like lotus eaters, and it's like just feeding on the dodos. And I think that's where it's coming. So again, what I mean is there's a whole majority of people that are being raised truly as what Bernays called the herd. And he meant every word of that.
Oh, yeah. Here's a quote. I just thought of a quote here that I had handy by Aldous Huxley, and you've probably heard it before. In fact, I'm sure you have. But he made a speech at Berkeley, the Berkeley Language Center, in 1962.
Yep.
And he said, and here I would like briefly to compare the parable of Brave New World with another parable which was put forth more recently in George Orwell's book, 1984. I'm inclined to think that the scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships in many parts of the world, will be probably a good deal nearer to the Brave New World pattern than to the 1984 pattern. They will have they will be a good deal nearer, not because of any humanitarian qualms of the scientific dictators, but simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient than the other. It seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we're in the process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will, to get people to actually love their servitude. Yeah. A method of control by which a people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs by which any decent standard they ought not to enjoy. And these methods I think, are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance. But then there are the various other methods one can think of. There's, for example, the pharmacological method. This is one of the things I talked about in Brave New World. And the result would be, you can imagine a euphoric, which would make people thoroughly happy even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible. And I'm sure he knew that they were possible.
And I've been through this a year or so ago. I had much more contempt for him until John Bonanno came on and struck another look at Huxley. And even though I don't think he was a really great guy, I don't think he was laughing up his sleeve at what was to come. The way he spoke about it, just as you mentioned, I'm hoping that Berkeley lecture is still available in audio on the internet. But when you hear him speak, and again, it's the British accent, and he's very glib and erudite and articulate, and you almost don't like the guy, because he just sounds like the pompous Brit.
Yeah, it's just, when they speak, a lot of times when I hear these British aristocrats speak, they come off sounding like they're just sneering at everyone, It's like they're up on the little pedestal, looking down on the crowd. And I think it's people like that made my ancestors leave England a long time ago.
No, that was probably Liam's people. It was Liam's antecedents.
Yeah. I mean, they were over in Ireland messing with the Irish for an awful long time, and my folks are English and Irish, and so from both standpoints, they had to deal with these twits.
Well, yeah, but the British wouldn't do that anymore. They learned their lesson the first time. But but with Huxley, he did do some work and showed some kind of compassion for mine workers and such. Again, all in all, not a favorite guy, but I certainly don't look at him as contemptuously as I used to.
Yeah.
And both
we're talking about the British aristocracy, and I like to read a short quote from one of the people in the highest levels of that aristocracy, which is Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. If I were reincarnated, I would wish to be returned to Earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels. Well, now isn't that loving?
You know, well, just think about
what a nice guy.
Well, right. I mean, but remember, which of his two sons? Did you say Philip or Charlie?
Philip.
Okay, Philip. Well, all right. Now we pass it down to Charlie.
Yeah.
Who's not Mr. Compassion?
No, not at all.
And which of the two sons would you think would best be a proponent for what Philip and Charlie believe about humankind? Would you pick William as the one, or would you pick Harry as the one?
You know, I saw there was a scandal in Britain a few years back. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago,
right,
where Harry was running around in a Nazi SS uniform at a costume party.
No doubt.
And I think that was pretty. That was a kind of a loving move that he made there, showing maybe where his sympathies lie.
Yes, especially I'm sure in the castle after midnight chasing the scullery maids.
Yeah,
it's it's Harry. There's no doubt it's Harry. And I mean, and Harry was probably a little more dirty-faced in the military recently, and he's got the cigarette in his mouth once in a while. Now, this is the guy that definitely could cause more havoc. And I think that isn't there some kind of a possibility that when Liz kicks the bucket, or even before she does, that she kicks the royalty, the crown, to not Philip, but to, I think, Harry. I don't know. I think I heard that. I'm not sure. Who cares? But anyway.
I think Charles takes it first, and then it's William. But
and that's the way it's supposed to go. I'm just wondering if they're
Who knows? I mean, I can't figure all that stuff out. The Duke of this and the Lord of that and the Sir this and Sir. I don't care about the British peerage and all their.
But the reason I bring this up is because if it ever comes to the reality that Wells and others wanted, I mean, if you ever had more of a off with their heads mentality, I mean, that's got to go to Harry.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I saw that deal with the, and they showed a picture of him wearing his SS uniform, it was like, what a jerk, But this just shows their roots. I mean, really, when you get down to it, the British royal family is actually a German origin. The current royal family for several generations was based on, Saxe-Gotha? I can't remember. But they were from a province in Germany. It was one of those intermarriage things.
Well, I have to laugh because that Nazi uniform Harry has was probably his great uncle's.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, don't doubt that one bit.
Now that I've got
these people all, the British and the Germans, really the aristocracies of Europe in general, were all intermingled, and a lot of them, had the same attitudes toward the common people.
Well, think back, if you will, in grammar school. And I don't know if they taught it in your particular school or allowed you to read it, but they did in mine. And that was, some of Rudyard Kipling stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what? Little Black Sambo? What? And, I lived in a completely homogeneous neighborhood. I mean, the only difference in people was some were Catholics and some were Protestants, some were Irish and some were Italian. Mm-hmm. So I mean, nobody took much offense to it because you just kind of didn't put it together. It was like, okay, it's a story, it's a fable almost. But then later on, you're like, what was that about? And then you realize Kipling was just with this crowd as well.
Oh yeah, so he was an elitist for sure. Gunga Din, the story of the British, what was it? I guess you call him he wasn't a soldier, but he was one of the helpers, whatever. I don't know what they would call him. But, he was an Indian, and he stood up at the end and blew the bugle and alerted the British, against the rebels, and oh, isn't that great? He stood up for them, and all it really was about was rationalization for the empire, and imposing their will on other people and exploiting other people.
I don't know which comes first, the mentality to do such, or after you are successful in such an endeavor, you breed the mentality from that. Mm-hmm. And that is, obviously, since Rome, I would think you would not identify another more far-flung and powerful empire than Britain. Mm-hmm. And so when you conquer all the peoples you set out to conquer, is it because you had this mentality of supremacy, or was that you nourished the idea that you were supreme from all the conquests that you made? Does it really matter in the end? No, because they both go together. And it was only at the end of the 19th century, when they got their nose a little more bloody than they thought they would in the Boer War, that, of course, Rhodes made that famous comment about bringing the United States back into tow to be the brute beast to fight the wars their best blood no longer could.
Well, actually, several times in these episodes, I mentioned Pamela Harriman. It finally dawned on me who Pamela Harriman was. She was the wife, a much younger woman. She was the wife of Averill Harriman, but her grandfather, she was a Churchill. Her grandfather was Winston Churchill. So not only did you have them have the same ideas and ideals, and they knew each other socially, but they were even intermarried, the British and American aristocracies, for lack of a better term.
That is not any more uncommon to find. Every so often, a genealogist comes out and finds out that like every president was related to royalty.
Yeah.
And that Obama is like what, the 33rd cousin of truthfully, I forget who, either Clinton or I don't know, somebody. And it's all in the family. And it always will remain in the family. All right. Yeah. I'll let you go.
Okay. I guess one thing I'd like to talk about, and it's from a book by or an article in one of the writings of Anton Chaikin, who was also wrote quite a bit with Webster Tarpley. He wrote the book on unauthorized biography of George Bush. That's George Bush the First. And anyway, this is Population Control, Nazis in the UN by Anton Chaikin. The Rockefeller Foundation is the prime sponsor of public relations for the United Nations Drastic Depopulation Program. Evidence in the possession of growing number of researchers in America, England, and Germany demonstrates that the Foundation and its corporate, medical, and political associates organized the racial mass murder program of Nazi Germany. These globalists were not stopped after World War II. The United Nations alliance of the old Nazi right wing with the New Age left wing poses an even greater danger to the world today than the same grouping did in 1941. Oil monopolist John D. Rockefeller created a family-run Rockefeller Foundation in 1909. By 1929, he had placed $300 million worth of the family's controlling interest in the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey to the account of the foundation. The foundation's money created this medical specialty known as psychiatric genetics. For the new experimental field, the foundation reorganized medical teaching in Germany, creating and thenceforth continuously directing the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Psychiatry and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Eugenics, and Human Heredity. The Rockefellers' chief executive of these institutions was the fascist Swiss psychiatrist Ernst Rudin, assisted by his proteges Ottmar Verschuer and Franz Kallmann. In 1932, the British-led eugenics movement designated the Rockefellers' Dr. Rudin as the president of the Worldwide Eugenics Federation. The movement called for the killing or sterilization of people whose heredity made them a public burden. A few months later, Hitler took over Germany, and the Rockefeller-Rudin apparatus became a section of the Nazi state. The regime appointed Rudin head of the Racial Hygiene Society. Rudin and his staff, as part of the task force of heredity experts, chaired by SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, drew up the sterilization law. Described as an American model law, it was adopted in July 1933 and proudly printed in the 1933 Eugenical News with Hitler's signature. The Rockefeller Group drew up other racial laws also based on existing Virginia statutes. The T4 unit of the Hitler Chancery, based on psychiatrists led by Rudin and his staff, cooperated in creating propaganda films to sell mercy killing to German citizens. The public reacted antagonistically, and Hitler had to withdraw a tearjerker Right to Die film from the movie theaters. The proper groundwork had not yet been laid. Under the Nazis, the German chemical company IG Farben and Rockefeller's Standard Oil in New Jersey were effectively a single firm, merged in hundreds of cartel agreements. IG Farben was led up until 1937 by the Warburg family, Rockefeller's partner in banking and in the design of Nazi German eugenics. Following the German invasion of Poland in 1939, Standard Oil pledged to keep the merger with IG Farben going even if the U.S. entered the war. This was exposed in 1942 by Senator Harry Truman's investigating committee. President Roosevelt took hundreds of legal measures during the war to try to stop the Standard IG Farben cartel from supplying the enemy war machine. In 1940-41, IG Farben built a gigantic factory at Auschwitz in Poland to utilize the Standard Oil IG Farben patents with concentration camp labor to make gasoline from coal. The SS was assigned to guard the Jewish and other inmates and select for killing those who were unfit for IG Farben slave labor. Standard Germany President Emil Helfrich testified after the war that the Standard Oil funds helped pay for SS guards at Auschwitz. In 1940, 6 months after the notorious Standard IG meeting, European Rockefeller Foundation official Daniel O'Brien wrote to the Foundation's chief medical officer, Alan Gregg, that it would be unfortunate if it was chosen to stop research, which has no relation to war issues. So the Foundation continued financing Nazi psychiatric research, which translates into mind control research, during the war. In 1936, Rockefeller's Dr. Franz Kalman interrupted his study of hereditary degeneracy and immigrated to America because he was half Jewish. Kalman went to New York and established the medical genetics department of the New York State Psychiatric Institute. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry published Kalman's study of over 1,000 cases of schizophrenia, which tried to prove its hereditary basis. And in the book, Kalman thanked his longtime boss and mentor, Rudin. Kalman's book, published in 1938 in the U.S. and Nazi Germany, was used by the T4 unit as a rationalization to begin in 1939 the murder of mental patients and various defective people, perhaps most of them children. Gas and lethal injections were used to kill 250,000 people under this program, in which the staff for a broader murder program was desensitized and trained. And here's something really shocking. Dr. Mengele. In 1943, Ottmar Verscher's assistant, Joseph Mengele, was made medical commandant of Auschwitz. As wartime director of Rockefeller's Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Eugenics, and Human Heredity in Berlin, Verscher secured funds for Mengele's experiments at Auschwitz from the German Research Council. Verscher took a progress report to the council. My co-researcher in this research is my assistant, the anthropologist and physician Mengele. He is serving as a Hauptsturmführer and camp doctor in the concentration camp Auschwitz. With the permission of the Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler, anthropological research is being undertaken on the various racial groups in the concentration camps, and blood samples will be sent to my laboratory for investigation. Mengele prowled the railroad lines leading into Auschwitz looking for twins, a favorite subject of psychiatric geneticists. On arrival at Mengele's experimental station, twins filled out a detailed questionnaire from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. There were daily drawings of blood from Verscher's specific protein research. Needles were injected into the eyes for work on eye color. There were experimental blood transfusions and infections. Organs and limbs were removed, sometimes without anesthetics. Sex changes were attempted. Females were sterilized. Males were castrated. Thousands were murdered, and their organs, eyeballs, heads, and limbs were sent to Verscher and Rockefeller Group at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Well, this shows you that the Rockefellers were involved in some really loving eugenics experimentation along with the Nazis and in collusion with the Nazis. I have another article or excerpt from a book, actually, by Edwin Black. Edwin Black is the author of IBM and the Holocaust and
War Against the Weak.
War Against the Weak, yeah. This is from War Against the Weak. I'm glad you're familiar with that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he's one of the guests that turned me down.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too. He's somebody I wanted to hear.
Well, a little later on, I'm going to use Jerry Leonard, who was one of your guests at my request.
That's right.
And he's really a good writer and did some great research. Anyway, I was going to go into this thing with Black. Eugenics would have been so much bizarre parlor talk had it not been for extensive financing by corporate philanthropies, especially the Carnegie Institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Harriman Railroad fortune. They were all in league with some of America's most respected scientists hailing from such prestigious universities as Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. These academicians espoused race theory and race science and then faked and twisted data to serve eugenic racist claims. Stanford president David Starr Jordan originated the notion of race and blood in his 1902 racial epistle, Blood of a Nation, in which the university scholar declared that human qualities and conditions such as talent and poverty were passed through the blood. In 1904, the Carnegie Institute established a laboratory complex at Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island that stockpiled millions of index cards on ordinary Americans as researchers carefully plotted the removal of families, bloodlines, and whole peoples. From Cold Spring Harbor, eugenics advocates agitated in the legislatures of America as well as the nation's social service agencies and associations. The Harriman Railroad fortune paid local charities such as the New York Bureau of Industries and Immigration to seek out Jewish, Italian, and other immigrants in New York and other crowded cities and subject them to deportation on trumped up confinement or forced sterilization. The Rockefeller Foundation helped found the German eugenics program and even funded the program that Joseph Mengele worked in before he went to Auschwitz, which we already talked about. It's pretty obvious from there. You're seeing a pattern where the American eugenics people were involved with the British and the Germans. This was not just a German thing that happened. It didn't just originate with Hitler and the Nazis. Here's something that a lot of people are not aware of, that there was a great deal of forced sterilization in this country back in the 20s and 30s. In fact, in his book here, Edwin Black says, California sterilized 9,782 individuals, mostly women. Many were classified as bad girls, diagnosed as passionate, oversexed, or sexually wayward. In 1933 alone, at least 1,278 coercive sterilizations were performed, 700 of which were on women. The state's two leading sterilization mills in 1933 were Sonoma State Hospital with 388 operations and Patton State Hospital with 363 operations. Other sterilization centers included Agnews, Mendocino, Napa, Norwalk, Stockton, and Pacific Colony State Hospital. Even the United States Supreme Court endorsed aspects of eugenics. In its infamous 1927 decision, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This decision opened the floodgates for thousands to be coercively sterilized or otherwise persecuted as subhumans. Years later, the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials quoted Oliver Wendell Holmes in their own defense.
You know, sorry to say it, though, too, Larry, when you were talking about not real solid historical research, and I think you must admit this, too. From what we've seen from the alternate patriot networks and news, I'll have to say, if the premise of the book is salacious enough, they don't really care how accurately it's researched. And I've said this, and I'm not having a pity party, but I find that audience places little value on the truth. It's like what is it? What did REO Speedwagon say? Talk is cheap when the story is good. Mm-hmm. And that's what I see with these characters. You know, they come up with stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
And then when you get somebody who comes up with something that's a little bit out there, but has some reasonable research behind it, they get the doo-doo on them as well. Mm-hmm. So I have a tendency to believe, especially when you go into this stuff about not being able to identify bodies, now we got a problem.
Yeah.
And what do you do? Take the governmental word or the international word that Hitler was actually dead there? You know, if you couldn't pull him out and have a funeral or something like that, I'm thinking he got away.
Yeah.
But
I've seen several programs on it where people were trying to, document it and figure out exactly what happened. And you get all kinds of stories. And unfortunately, I don't think anybody's really sure at this point. The Russians were very skeptical and very suspicious of the bodies that were supposed to be Hitler and Eva Braun. And, they did some research. And there was one thing where I believe it was in the University of Connecticut did some research on it. And a professor of history and a professor of anthropology together were working on it. And there was a skull that was supposed to be examined, and after they examined it, it was supposed to be Hitler's skull. After they examined it, they found out, the anthropology professor even brought in some medical people, and they looked at the skull, and it turns out the skull was actually the skull of a woman, and therefore could not be Hitler. Also, it was the skull of a person who was probably in their 30s, and Hitler was 56 when he died. So it turns out that, nobody's really sure. I'm not sure if the Russians were trying to fake him out. Probably not. Probably just something that got put into the archives, that somebody hadn't really checked out thoroughly.
But, remember, Stalin knew the handshake, too.
Yeah.
And again, when Napoleon scourged Europe and then they brought him out for for an encore, he exiled himself for the most part, it seems.
Yeah.
And there were plenty of opportunities, apparently, to tell him, nappy baby, we can get you to the United States, don't sweat it, And he got like, no, he just wanted to be a hero there. The same thing with Hitler. I think both of those guys were taking orders. After they did what they were supposed to do, they were both ordered to scuttle their armies, which they did. And now the question is, where did Hitler go afterwards? In other words, Hitler knew the handshake as well. And here's what I'm going to throw to you. Looking back over all this, and this Aryanism, one, it strikes me, if we really take a look at this, is how ironic is it that Hitler, a little smurf with black hair, dark eyes, is going ahead and running this thing about Aryanism and Aryan supremacy. First of all, it's like, what are you missing here, Adolf? You're not in the program. Secondly, do you think that was given to him to basically do a test run on? As nasty as that sounds, you think that was just something that he was given to accomplish, to see how much the world was ready for that kind of genocide and really absolute hatred for anything other than what we are. Now, if you've not been asked that, and I doubt you have, thinking about it now, do you think that was something that really didn't come out of his cooker, but that was given to him to run?
Well, I think he agreed with the concepts, of creating a new man, of creating a new race. We've talked about Blavatsky and the root races and all that, and Hitler was very much into Aryan racial theories, very, very much so. And I believe that when he was in Vienna during his bum period, when he was, running around formulating his ideas, as a young man, I have a little thing in here. It says, this is from Bernhard Schreiber. Before leaving Vienna in 1913, as Hitler reveals in his Mein Kampf, he spent much of his time in the city library, where he claims to have studied the history of a number of subjects, particularly in increasingly political, economic theories and military political works. Because he rarely mentioned the title of anything he read, it is difficult to determine what the actual titles of the books were, but the similarity between Hitler's ideas and those of Gustave Le Bon, the French psychologists, are so striking that one could definitely draw the conclusion that he studied Le Bon's book, The Psychology of the Masses, and which was acquired in 1908 by the library. Hitler, as we've already seen, was well steeped in pan-German literature and must have been familiar with Gobineau, another Frenchman. Also, Dietrich Eckart, an intimate friend and early supporter, claimed in a crudely written brochure published in 1924 that, amongst other works, Hitler had studied the Frenchman Vacher Lepage. His book, The Aryan and His Role in the Community, published in 1899. This was later translated into German in 1939 and published in Frankfurt under the title Aryan and His Role in the Community. Lepage seems to have had a wide field of interest. Apart from being a leading eugenicist, he also found time to engage his attention with crude social Darwinism and racism. It might have also been Hitler speaking when Lepage stated in his book, "The idea of justice is an illusion, there's nothing but force, and the race, the nation is everything." In addition to these topics, Hitler was also certainly familiar with the subject of geopolitics, as formulated by the English originator Sir Halford Mackinder and German exponent Karl Haushofer. Geopolitics, a relatively unknown subject, was based on the theory that the foreign policy of a country was determined by its location, natural resources, raw materials, and opportunities rather than its political development. I just kind of threw that in there. I'd planned to talk about it earlier and I hadn't, but I threw it in there to illustrate that Hitler really was familiar with some of the concepts we've been talking about and had studied them and believed in them. Hitler was just a very ambitious politician who did anything and everything he could to establish himself as a power, and he was able to accomplish that with the backing of quite a few different sponsors over a period of years, both on a spiritual level and on an economic level. But I think he was basically brought to power by what I call the New World Order aristocrats, and that would be the people in the United States. It would be the industrialists and the financiers who put him into power, along with their German counterparts. There were also French and British elements involved with it as well, and other countries. But predominantly it was the United States, Great Britain, and German elites that brought Hitler into power.
All right. Do you think he was handled and told to do what to do?
That I've never been sure about. Okay. I think to an extent he was. I think he had to do certain things. He went to the industrialists and the bankers in Germany just prior to being put into the chancellorship, and basically told them, "Here, I'm going to make you a deal. You can either deal with me or the communists are going to take over." And of course, they didn't want that, and that was really true what he was saying. Although it's possible, social democrats who were not hardcore communists but were, socialists would have continued. The Weimar Republic would have continued. But he offered them, great profits, and they were always in his court. I've never really been sure. I think, honestly, and this may sound a little far-fetched, but I really think his main goal was to create this new man, and I think that was a spiritual goal, and I think that was based on Satanism. And I think that his real mentor was the demonic presence, or maybe even Satan himself, either the demonic presence that inhabited or possessed him, or Satan himself.
Okay, then I would say then that if that be the case,
that's just speculation on my part.
No, I understand, but from a spiritual point of view, dare we say Christian? But from a spiritual point of view, then what we're seeing though that is a chapter in an unfinished book. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you figure out what the two world wars were about, and how they handled the second one, and why he seemed to obviously resonate with so many people to the point where whatever he expounded upon, whatever he espoused, lives on to this day. Mm-hmm. But I would say that he did not succeed, but that he brought around yet another advancement of an agenda.
Yeah, it's three world wars. We've spoken about the Pike-Mazzini letter. And although I'm not really convinced that Pike wrote this letter, the wording of that and the plan that is put forth in that letter, whoever wrote it, I think is a very good capsulization of what the New World Order's plans are. And that New World Order plan is to advance their agenda by having 3 world wars, which will eventually result in their dictatorship. It will eventually result in world government, and the New World Order will.
Yes, and also the abolishment of religion.
Right.
Now, as I
said, except for their religion.
Well, the state becomes a religion.
Yeah.
And then people find out if there really is a God and Satan. Get ready. Mm-hmm. But William Still, who wrote the Money Masters, and the New World Order, was on twice, and he's the only person I know of that said he saw that letter in the London Museum, which has since been removed.
Yeah,
I'll take him at his word. I think he's no nonsense.
Yeah.
Phelps refers to it, but could not. And he said, I can't corroborate the fact that it ever was there.
Yeah.
Still says
it
was.
The only reason I don't buy it, and I'm not calling anyone a liar or anything like that.
Yes, you are.
No, not really.
I know.
I'm really not. I don't know the man. I certainly wouldn't want to impugn his character not knowing him. But the only reason I don't believe that it may be legitimate is that he uses some terminology that Pike would not have known about. For example, the term fascism is used, fascist. Well, that term wasn't really invented until the 1920s with Mussolini. Mussolini came up with that as a term for his party, his right-wing party. So, back in the 19th century, that term would not have been known to Pike. They also there's some other things in there that just I wasn't able to figure it out. Now, you could say, well, if this was inspired by satanic spiritual forces,
then Pike would know.
Then they may have been able to impart that to Pike and let him know what the terminology would be. So, it could go either way. All I'm saying is it's all speculation. But one thing about that letter and about the wording in that letter is it perfectly sets forth the plan that they have. I mean, it's all seeming to come about just as they laid it down.
Well, remember at the very beginning I mentioned to you that Angie had come upon, whatever it is, some survey, an article that stated that 70 million Americans were evangelical Christians. Mm-hmm. Here's what I think is happening. We've got now something like, 6-7 months into 6 months into the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Mm-hmm. What I've seen happen in and around New York City, the hubbub about Muslims putting up some kind of some kind of center. Let's just say that. Mm-hmm. Worship, whatever, multi-use, fine.
A mosque, maybe. I've forgotten whether it was a mosque or a center or something.
So, and then that started with that idiot up there, King, who's I guess he's a congressman out of that district. And then we go into this thing about bringing back out Pan Am 103 and a lot of stuff that now is starting to, I think, create a certain anti-Islamic attitude, later to become perhaps a furor. A furor. I'm thinking of it's F-U-R-O-R, not F-U-H-E-R. And then you get this bit about, 70 million Americans are evangelical Christians. So what I'm saying is there's going to be this, and you know this to be true, Larry.
Yeah.
The people who get the most press are the lunatic fringe of all three religions.
Oh, yeah. It's no fun to go talk to somebody who's rational and humane. We always want to run to somebody who's spouting off some crazy, outrageous, aggressive ideas.
And of course, what that does is, for those who ever thought about perhaps signing on board to a particular religion, or just the general public, makes everyone wish that all of them would go away. Mm-hmm. So I think we're seeing this agitation occur, and it will be brought to a certain kind of pinnacle, if that's the word for it, right around 9/11 of this year. Mm-hmm. So
you might be right.
Something's going on there. There's no two ways about it.
They are pumping it up for a new crusade.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
And the Muslims are falling right for it, just like the Tea Party types are falling for it. Radical Islam is on the rise, and people who think that this new, quote, revolution in Egypt and North Africa is going to be a good thing are in for a big, ugly surprise. The Muslim Brotherhood, who is behind, or one of the main forces in Egypt right now behind that revolution, they are nothing but the old Arab Nazis, and the person that was most associated with the Muslim Brotherhood was Hajj Amin Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and who was probably, along with Hitler, the biggest Jew hater of the 20th century. He started off his career as an officer in the Turkish military in World War I, and he was one of the people who oversaw the massacre of the Christian Armenians, the Orthodox Christian Armenians. And another thing a lot of people don't understand is radical Islam doesn't like Christianity any more than it likes the Jews. So we're going to, it's getting pumped up, and they're falling right in line, and they are not just a boogeyman; they are really a threat. And I think Egypt is going to be driven into the camp of radical Islam, and you're going to have a confederation of Muslim states. And you're looking at a situation where Egypt is obviously right on the Suez Canal. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood being funded in part by the Iranians, and the Iranians are on the other side, are down a little farther on the Arabian Gulf there. And you're looking at a situation where the lifeline of industrial economies of the West can get choked off real quick by shutting off the supply of oil. And all it would take is for somebody to use a few missiles and take out a tanker or two in the Gulf. And that's not going to be very hard to do. The Iranians already have very sophisticated sunburn missiles, which they acquired from the Russians quite a while back. They also have a ton of silkworms and other lower technology missiles. You're looking at the situation with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has what I've seen estimated from a Canadian source, a guy who used to be in the Canadian military. Can't remember his name right offhand, but I read an article by him the other day. He was saying what's really frightening is that now they had about 10,000 missiles before the 2006 war, when they basically just harassed the Israelis with those. He said, but they've got approximately 60,000 missiles now that they can fire at the Israelis. And with considerably nastier warheads, these aren't just high explosive warheads. These can be chemical and biological warheads. The Israelis aren't going to sit there and just allow them to do that. You know, it's just not going to happen. They'll come out swinging. And you've got a potential right there for World War III to get started.
Well, it really doesn't matter what I think, but I actually do believe that we're not that close to hitting time. Now, of course, anything can happen in a moment.
It's going to take a while, sure. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, but I think we're seeing a certain kind of preparation for this.
Oh yeah, it's. I mean, it looks like they're coming down Main Street with a brass band, and you can kind of barely hear the music at this point because you're, a couple miles or maybe a mile down the road. You can just barely hear the music. You can't really quite see the band yet, but it's coming. It's going to march right over you, pretty soon. And the American public is just sitting there buying all this. I say the American public. A large portion of the American public is buying all this BS that CNN and Fox and MSNBC and all the other alphabet networks are putting out about what's really going on over there. They're not telling people the truth. I even saw a thing where the New York Times has a policy where they're not printing letters to the editor or, about the Muslim Brotherhood. If people say that's not really true, the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. Muslim Brotherhood has a history of violence. They won't even print those because they're trying to promote this thing. There's an agenda behind all this, and
we won't beat the drum any more about this. But what you said is true. I mean, you should hear some of the stories from Andy Sr., who at one time, I guess, with a certain regularity, wrote letters to the editor. So did I, and I've seen some interesting changes in my stuff.
Yeah.
That's what you get when you get. But what it does is it underlines the whole problem, and that is those of us who get it, those who would be, I guess, somewhat smart patriots, realistic patriots. You can't win a war unless you win the war for propaganda. And, of course, we have no access to major mainstream media, either electronic or print. And that's the big, when people say, well, how can they keep a conspiracy so large, so quiet? Well, that's how they do it.
They own the media.
If you don't get
they can edit out anything they want.
Oh,
they just don't run the stories.
Exactly.
They show you what they want you to see, and they manipulate you that way.
That is the story. They are the gatekeepers.
People just don't seem to get that. Why is it? I don't understand. People that are a lot smarter than me don't even get that. And I can't understand why.
But we all grew up, and people still are growing up for as much as they use their brains, believing anything that comes out on mainstream TV, radio, and in newspapers is the truth because, well, it's the truth. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not. And they're like, oh, no, the famous line, which I created, was the problem with Americans is that they're propagandized and they're believing they can't be propagandized.
Exactly.
And there you go. Oh, we're too smart for that. Oh, yeah? Guess what?
This is America. That could never happen here.
Yeah.
Well, it does happen here, and it is happening here. My God, it's almost 50 years ago now, in November of 1963, that John Kennedy was gunned down, and the official explanation almost 50 years later is that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin, which is a pile of crap if you really look into that case.
But what even blows your mind more is that they convened another subcommittee in 77, and they said, okay...
House Committee of Assassinations comes out and says, no, there was at least 2 shooters.
They said there was a conspiracy. That's right. And then everybody just went home.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's like, well, wait a minute.
I know.
That, by definition, means it's a conspiracy. Who are these people?
Exactly.
Doesn't anybody want to look into that and find out who they were? And I think that the problem is the media is just not going to... Oh, and you can go into the assassination of RFK. My God, Sirhan, if he wasn't a Manchurian candidate, I don't know who was. You look at that and you see Robert Kennedy was killed by 2 shots behind his ear. Sirhan never got behind Robert Kennedy, and he never and these shots were coming from a downward angle, so it had to be somebody behind Robert Kennedy shooting downward, within 6 inches. This is Thomas Noguchi saying this, who's one of the premier coroners,
medical examiners,
forensic specialists in the United States.
Yeah, that worked out real well.
And he said it, and he got a lot of criticism about it. Look, this is what happened. These are the facts. This is what I found. And he said he didn't, I don't think he came out and said it publicly, but you got the impression that he just didn't buy the whole police, official story at all.
No, he was a real popular figure in the OJ thing too. Yeah, that trial worked out real well. And to this day, I'm still wondering how OJ's doing with tracking down the real killer.
I don't know. It's like, and the thing with Martin Luther King.
You're right.
One after another. People. It's all the same trick that it dates back to the early beginnings of the Nazi movement and before that, and the beginnings of the New World Order. But what happens is anyone who is a threat to them politically, socially, culturally, gets wiped out. They did this in the 1920s in the Weimar Republic. Practically every leading light among the legitimate conservatives, the liberals, the socialists, anybody to the left of the Nazis, which was just about everybody, anybody to the left of them that they considered a threat got killed. They got offed, and the police would act like they just didn't know what happened because they weren't going to investigate. And that's the same way it happens here. I could go into that in a lot more detail, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in another segment.
Yep, no problem with that. We'll let it go for now, and we'll pick up next time. The eugenics thing is one of the vestiges of actually where we were at in the West prior to World War II. So, Nazi Germany had a lot to do with it, a lot to advance it. But boy, we already found fertile fields with the Brits and the United States. So it's one of those dirty little things, really dirty little things we don't want to believe about ourselves. But guess what, folks? It's there. So until next time, Larry, thanks for being with us.